So Boaz says, listen, Ruth, I want to honor what you're asking of me, and I want to do this because you are a woman of excellence, and that's who I want to be with. But there's an order. As a matter of fact, I'm not the closest redeemer. And if you notice, if you go back and read Scripture, Ruth did not say, you are our redeemer. She says, you are a redeemer. And in fact, there is a redeemer who's younger, who's also wealthy, and who is a closer relative to Elimelech. It's actually up to him. Now, they could have gone off and been Romeo and Juliet and done their whole fancy thing and all, whatever. But remember, we're talking about people with character and integrity. And we're also talking about people who believe that if God's hand is upon something, he's going to bless it. And there's a faith element in that. So Boaz says, I need to go to that Redeemer and present this. And so chapter 4, Boaz goes up, and we're going to put it on the screen, he goes up to the gate, and he sat down at the gate, and behold, the Redeemer of whom Boaz had spoken came by. Boaz said, turn aside, friend, and sit down here. I got something I got to share with you. And he turned aside, and he sat down. And then he took 10 men of the elders of the city, and he said, sit down here. So they all sat down. So Boaz has the closest Redeemer. He's got 10 elders because there ain't lawyers and there ain't written contracts. So what he needs is that Redeemer, and then what he needs is 10 witnesses by the elders to see this whole discussion that's about to take place. However this is going to go, and Boaz is going to honor it. And Boaz says to them, Naomi, who has come back from the country of Moab, she's selling the parcel of land that belonged to our relative Elimelech. So I thought I would tell you about it. Buy it in the presence of those sitting here, the elders of my people. If you are going to redeem it, redeem it. But if you will not, tell me that I may know, for there is no one besides you to redeem it, and I am after you. But that man said, I will redeem it. There's a whole bunch of questions you could ask here. Why does Boaz lead with the land? Which is probably the most attractive portion of this, especially for a redeemer who has not met Ruth. And there's a whole bunch of opinions and different things. Scholars have looked at this and tried to dissect it. As I read it, here's what I think. I think Boaz is doing the upright and honest thing. And he's saying, here's this land. It's valuable. Has meaning, and you are the Redeemer. So it's for you. You can buy this. And of course, the Redeemer hears this, and he goes, I'll redeem it. But then if you continue on, in verse 5, then Boaz says, okay, if you're going to redeem it, the day you buy the field from the hand of Naomi, you also acquire Ruth the Moabite, the widow of the dead, in order to perpetuate the name of the dead in his inheritance. Remember what the role of a Redeemer is? And how the family line works and the inheritance and all that. And when this Redeemer heard that, wait a minute, so I get the land, but I also have Ruth, this Moabite woman, and if we have a child, that stays in that family line. So he says, I cannot redeem it for myself, lest I impair my own inheritance. Take my right of redemption yourself, Boaz, I cannot redeem it. Now, there's a variety of reasons of things that could be going on here. The Moabite thing could be coming into play. The fact that, hey, I don't want to have a child with a Moabite woman and have that land just stay in there. What's in this for me? We don't know if this guy has children of his own at this point, but maybe one day he does, and he doesn't want to muddy those waters. For whatever reason, he basically says, once Ruth entered the equation, I'm out. And this makes it to where Boaz goes, then I'm in. And he says in verse 7, now this was the custom in former times in Israel concerning redeeming and exchanging. To confirm a transaction, the one drew off his sandal and gave it to the other, and this was the manner of attesting in Israel. And let me just say, I want to bring back this custom. Let's do it, y'all. That was not the plan. It's always good to have one foot on holy ground and 1 foot. All right. Somebody want to hook me up with my shoe over there? No, I'll go. Thank you. Might be a bit warm, sorry. All right. Thank you, Brother Todd. He's an elder. All right. And so the shoe was taken off. We don't know who took off the sandal. I'm assuming whatever. It might have been the one who was the first, who would have been the Redeemer, the unnamed person. And let me just say this to you all. He probably made this decision because he hadn't met Ruth. He didn't know what he was missing. He thought the land was the most valuable part of this whole deal. He was wrong. So he took off his sandal and passed it on to someone else. And maybe we're all far too willing to take off our sandal figuratively and be passing it to other people and giving away blessings and things to someone else that we haven't put much thought into these things. When I was a young man and I was in high school, and she's not in here today, so I'll tell this story. She's working in the nursery. I was dating someone else. Maybe I should stop talking. And I was standing outside of Building A in our high school on the south side of Chicago. And in that time, and y'all can remember this, right? When you had that time when you didn't know who your wife was going to be, or you didn't know who your husband was going to be, and you kind of wondered about these things. You're always on the lookout, and it's just kind of this magical time, and it's really cool, you know. And I'll just be honest with you. I used to think about, I wonder if I've met my wife yet. I used to think that. And I was dating this other girl, and I used to tell the youth group this all the time. Every girl I ever dated, I thought was going to be my wife. And then a couple weeks would pass. And, you know. But I never will forget the first time this girl, I didn't know her name, Sarah Nyquist. I was standing with my friend Zach, who sometimes watches. And this girl comes walking out of Building A and walked across the field. And I couldn't have told you any of those things. What was going to happen, the life we've had. We've been married 23 years. We'd have 4 kids. None of that. But I can tell you there was something different immediately, even though we didn't talk to each other or date or do any of those things till years and years down the road. And the girls and the people who I was dating on and off at the time, and I'll say this to anyone, and you guys would probably say this too, yes, they were special. And yes, who they're with is special too, and they're for them, for other people. But God, early on, showed me right away, she's different. That's what Boaz saw in Ruth. That's what Ruth saw in Boaz. And then when God showed them that, they said, I'm going to carry myself with character and integrity and to wait for them. Wait for that person and honor God in the waiting. We've forgotten about Naomi because Ruth and Boaz get together. They have a son. His name is Obed. And in verse 14, when the beginning of the story starts with this woman, Naomi, who loses her husband, who says that she's bitter because the Lord's hand is against her, who then was the first one to see, no, God's up to something here with this Boaz and Ruth story. And then who is one who would see this grandchild, Obed, come and redeem Elimelech, her husband, who had walked away from the Lord. And she thought, this is the end. And then God provides someone to come back and redeem after Naomi made the decision, I'm going to return to the Lord. And as she's holding this grandson, Obed, in verse 14, the women of the town said to Naomi, blessed be the Lord, who has not left you this day without a redeemer, and may his name be renowned in Israel. He shall be to you a restorer of life and a nourisher of your old age. For your daughter-in-law, who loves you, who is more to you than 7 sons, has given birth to him. And yet the book is called Ruth. Well, what we see here at the end is Naomi with a redemption story. She's given the honor of being the one who cares for and raises Obed in the care of Ruth and Boaz. Obed would go on to be the father of Jesse. Jesse would be the father of King David. King David would have a covenant with God, and God would say to King David, "You are a man after my own heart. I will bring about a Savior. Your kingdom will never end. And it is through the line of David that Jesus will come." And it began with these people of character and integrity, who, if you would have said to them at the time, "What is your character? What is integrity? Why are you doing those things?" Well, it's a faith step. It's a faith step. But let me just say this. When you are honoring God in God's ways, have faith that God will honor you in his ways. The family line of King David, 1 Corinthians 6 tells us that Jesus Christ would go to a cross, that for a fallen people who are separated from God, his death and resurrection would redeem them who believe. Boaz is the kinsman redeemer who would be the model that God would say Jesus would come to be our redeemer. And you might say, why for us? What's in it for God? Jesus did not consider equality with God something to be grasped, but instead gave up what was in heaven and came down and became flesh and dwelt among us. He sees you. He loves you. And we can read the story of Ruth and Boaz, and when you read it and you just really absorb it, you begin to see that Boaz very quickly becomes one who is, Jesus is perfect, Jesus is God. None of us could ever do that, but Boaz becomes the guy who men in this room, you need to learn more about him. And we need to follow his example of a way to live in this world. So I want to invite the worship team to come on up here. We're going to have this closing song. I thank you for hanging with me today. I hope your lunch reservation's not messed up. But I want you to just take this story today, and as we sing this song, Christ be magnified, you just absorb it and say, hey, listen, if any of this stuff didn't register, or you feel like, oh, I'm falling short, there's no better time than right now to dedicate your life, to rededicate yourself and your steps to the Lord, and to make a decision to magnify God in all your decisions, in the way you carry yourself, and to follow his word.